What happens when a wife trades her anniversary dinner for a rooftop night with her ex, then calls it nothing? How does a quiet husband turn humiliation into order, and order into a public legal action? Can a woman who swears it was harmless survive the moment when the paperwork lands in daylight? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Zuleika Penn, and I swear it wasn't cheating, it was closure. Our 5th anniversary fell on a Friday, and Ethan had booked some quiet dinner at that restaurant with candles and violin music, the kind that makes me feel trapped. Mark texted that morning, said he was in town, said he missed the way I used to laugh. I told myself one drink wouldn't hurt. I told myself Ethan would understand. I ended up on a rooftop bar under fairy lights, drinking too much and talking about what-ifs. When I looked at the time, it was past midnight. Ethan's dinner reservation had expired 3 hours earlier. I sent a message saying the meeting ran late. He only replied with, "Okay." The next morning, the apartment was silent. His plate from last night was still covered with foil. He didn't yell, didn't even ask. That calm scared me more than shouting would have. I told him it wasn't serious, that Mark was just an old friend. He said, "You made a choice." Now I can't stop thinking about that line. I thought I'd won the argument, but I didn't know that when Ethan went quiet, he wasn't ignoring me, he was documenting everything. The morning after our anniversary, I walked into the kitchen pretending not to notice the silence. Ethan was sitting at the table, dressed for work, reading something on his phone. His plate from the night before was untouched, covered neatly with foil. I tried to sound light. I said I'd lost track of time. He said, without looking up, "You usually do." I laughed too fast. I told him it wasn't what he thought, that Mark had texted about some project idea, something harmless. He nodded once, still scrolling. I poured coffee loudly, hoping he'd look at me. He didn't. On the counter sat 2 mugs, his plain one, clean and empty, mine with lipstick smudges from the night before. He finally said, "You missed our reservation." I said, "It was just dinner." He said, "No, it was the only plan that mattered." I tried to spin it. I said I didn't want us to become predictable, that sometimes people need space to feel alive. He said, "You don't take space, Zuleika. You take exits." That one hit. I told him he was being dramatic. He said, "Maybe, but at least I stayed." He stood up, carried his coffee to the sink, rinsed it carefully, and placed it on the far end of the counter, away from mine. Then he grabbed his keys and bag. I said he didn't even want to talk. He said, "We already did. You just weren't there." The door latch clicked softly as he left. I stared at the empty chair, then at my reflection in the dark window. My phone buzzed. A text preview from Mark lit up. "Had fun last night. You still have that same laugh." I deleted it before opening. By noon, I convinced myself I could fix things. I sent Ethan a long message about how we both needed to loosen up. That one missed dinner didn't mean anything. He didn't reply. I checked his social media. Nothing new, nothing posted. Typical. He never aired things online. I told myself that meant he wasn't angry. That evening, he came home early. I had dinner ready, a small peace offering. He didn't say a word, just sat down and ate in silence. I talked about work, about how clients were impossible, how the city felt crowded. He listened, nodded occasionally. When I asked if he was mad, he said, "I'm thinking." "About what?" I asked. He said, "Patterns." I laughed again, said he sounded like a therapist. He said, "I just notice what repeats." I told him he was reading too much into everything, that one evening didn't mean the end of the world. He said, "It didn't end the world, just the story I thought we were in." I tried to grab his hand, but he pulled back gently. Later, I found him in the guest room, sitting on the edge of the bed, typing something on his laptop. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. I said, "You're avoiding me." He said, "No, just documenting." I laughed, asked what that meant. He said, "It helps me stay clear." On the screen, I saw folders labeled Home, Auto, and Bank. I asked what he was organizing. He said, "Just catching up." The smell of printer toner drifted from the desk. A small red light blinked as the machine came to life. It printed one sheet, then another. He gathered them before I could see. I said he was being paranoid. He said, "I'm being proper." That word bothered me, proper. It sounded rehearsed, detached. He shut the drawer and locked it with a quiet click. I tried to joke, said maybe he was writing his autobiography about living with a dramatic wife. He said, "You'd call it that." I'd call it evidence. I froze. Evidence of what? He didn't answer. He put on his headphones, started a quiet call. I caught words like follow-up, statement, and Monday. His tone was calm, polite. When he noticed me watching, he paused the call. He said, "You can keep pretending, or you can start understanding." I said, "Understanding what?" He said, "That jokes have consequences." I snapped that he was overreacting. He didn't respond. I slammed the door and went to the kitchen. The printer in the other room hummed again. At midnight, I couldn't sleep. I scrolled through old photos of Mark and me from years ago, wondering if I'd gone too far. But the part of me that needed to feel wanted still whispered that Ethan should have fought for me, should have made me feel chosen. When Ethan walked past the door to get water, I asked if he was going to bed. He said, "Not yet." He glanced at the calendar on the fridge, circled in red on next Friday. I asked what the mark was for. He said, "A reminder." I said, "For what?" He said, "To follow up." Then he walked away, closing the door softly. The next morning, I woke up alone. On the counter sat his coffee mug, clean, dry, and turned upside down beside mine. When I checked his phone charger on the nightstand, it was gone. I opened the guest room door. His laptop was closed, desk spotless. Only one sticky note lay beside the printer. "Bring forms." I crumpled it and threw it in the trash. Later, when I called my mother, she said Ethan was probably just embarrassed. She told me to post something positive to shift the energy. So I did. I uploaded an old photo from that rooftop bar, me laughing with a glass in hand. Caption: "Sometimes you have to celebrate yourself." Within an hour, people started liking it. Old friends commented, "You look radiant." Someone even wrote, "Queen energy." When Ethan got home that night, I showed him the photo, said I was moving forward. He said, "You moved long before posting that." I told him he was cold. He said, "You confuse warmth with attention." I said, "You should be grateful people find me interesting." He said, "I'd rather they found you loyal." That one stung. I tried to guilt him. I said, "So now I'm the villain for having a life?" He said, "No, you're the example." He opened the fridge, took out a folder wedged between containers. It was labeled Utilities. He slid it under his arm. I asked why he kept paperwork in there. He said, "Cooler heads, remember?" I didn't even understand, but he looked like he did. He left early again the next morning. I heard the door close softly, like he didn't want to wake me, or maybe like he didn't plan to come back soon. A few hours later, my phone buzzed. "Mark again. You okay? That post looks like a warning." I didn't reply. I stared at his name on the screen until it faded. Then another notification appeared. Shared calendar reminder. Downtown 9:40 a.m. I didn't remember setting it. Ethan must have synced something. I opened the fridge to grab water and noticed the space where his folder had been was empty. The apartment felt colder than before. I told myself he'd get over it, that men always came back when they realized who they'd lost. But that night, when I heard the faint sound of the printer again and saw the glow under the guest room door, I knew something had shifted for good. The hum stopped, just as I reached the handle. Then came a quiet beep from his phone inside, and his voice saying softly, "File uploaded successfully." I froze, my hand still on the knob. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He just worked quietly, methodically, like a man who'd stopped arguing and started recording. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was the one in control anymore. 2 days later, the rooftop photos started spreading. I didn't post them, but someone had tagged me, Mark, probably. The caption read, "When old sparks meet new city lights." I laughed when I first saw it. It looked harmless. Me mid-laugh, hair blown back by the wind, a glass in hand, the skyline glowing behind me. But Ethan must have seen it too, because when I came home that evening, he didn't even say hello. He was at his desk again, typing something. The printer light blinked steadily. I said, trying to sound calm, "You're quiet again." He said, "I'm thinking." I asked what he was thinking about, and he said, "Patterns." That same word again. I asked if he could stop with the cryptic talk. He said, "You keep telling the same story and expecting a different ending." I laughed, too loud. I told him people were being dramatic online, that it was a friendly photo. He said, "Then why are you explaining it to me like it wasn't?" I told him he should defend me, not question me. He said, "You want a witness, not a partner." That line burned. I told him not everything was about loyalty, that sometimes people just need to breathe. He said, "You seem to be breathing fine, just not here." I stormed out before I could say something worse. At work the next morning, everyone was whispering. My coworker Nora smiled thinly and said she didn't know I had such an exciting anniversary. I pretended not to get it. Then she turned her phone around. There I was, laughing in Mark's direction while holding his arm. Someone had clipped the video from the rooftop bar's public story. Mr. Caro, my manager, came out of his office, serious as always. He said he wanted a quick word. My stomach sank. Inside the glass-walled HR room, he gestured for me to sit. He said clients had seen the post, that I represented the front face of the co-working space, and perception mattered. I said it was my personal life. He said, "Personal still looks public when people are recording." I tried to charm my way through it. I told him people love confidence, that women shouldn't be shamed for having fun. He said, "It's not shame I'm talking about, it's judgment." I said, maybe if people focused on their own marriages, they'd have less time to talk about mine. He frowned, clearly done with the conversation, and just said, "Please be more careful, Zuleika." As I stood to leave, I heard the printer behind him start spooling, shooting out pages. The HR assistant collected them in a folder with my name on the label. The last page came out blank. It made a soft, fluttering sound. When I returned to my desk, my phone buzzed with a missed call, no caller ID. I felt a strange chill but ignored it. At lunch, I checked Ethan's social media again. Still nothing. He wasn't reacting, not online, not at home. It was worse than anger. It was as if he'd left the room without moving his body. That night, I tried to make things light. I bought takeout, his favorite noodles. I joked about the video, said, "I guess I'm famous now." He looked at me, quiet for a long time, then said, "Is that what you wanted?" I said, "It's not that serious." He said, "Then stop talking about it like it is." He ate a few bites, then stood. The printer light blinked again, faint in the dark. Later, I peeked at his laptop when he went to shower. There was a spreadsheet open, rows with initials and dates. I didn't understand it. When he came back, he minimized the screen instantly. I asked what it was. He said, "I'm keeping things straight." I said, "About what?" He said, "About what's real." He went to bed early. I stayed awake scrolling through comments. Some said I was brave for choosing myself. Others said I was cruel. I clung to the positive ones, shared a few to my story. In the morning, Ethan was already gone. On the counter sat 2 mugs again. His on one side, mine on the other. That separation started to feel deliberate. At work, the HR assistant avoided eye contact. I caught sight of the printer again, the same soft hum as it spit out pages. I felt watched. I texted my mother, saying Ethan was being distant. She replied that men like him couldn't handle strong women. She said, "Post something bold. Remind him who he married." So I did. That night, I posted another rooftop photo with the caption, "You can't dim a woman who glows on her own." The comments came fast again. Hearts, claps, even a few laughing emojis. Ethan walked into the living room, halfway through me typing responses. He asked, "You posted that now?" I said, "Yes, I'm not hiding." He said, "You're documenting your own mistakes." I said, "You make it sound like a crime." He said, "Some things don't need crimes to destroy a person." I told him to stop talking like a detective. He said, "Maybe someone should." Then he went to the guest room again, closed the door. I heard the faint click of a drawer locking. I walked up, tried the handle, locked. The printer hummed again, steady, like breathing. When he came out, he had a folder tucked under his arm labeled Household. He placed it neatly on the table, then walked past me without a word. I shouted after him, "What are you even doing?" He said, "Getting things in order." I said, "For what?" He said, "For clarity." Then he left for his night walk, as if nothing had happened. When I checked the folder, it was empty, just a single sheet with the word statement printed on top. I crumpled it, threw it away, but a few minutes later, I fished it back out. The word looked oddly calm. The next morning, the office group chat buzzed. Someone sent the rooftop video again, edited with music. My heart pounded. At noon, Mr. Caro came to my desk. He said he'd received an inquiry from a client asking if I was that woman from the viral post. He said I needed to be careful about personal branding. I smiled tightly and said I'd handle it. When I got home that night, Ethan was sitting at the table, calm as ever. He asked if I'd had a good day. I said, "As good as anyone whose manager thinks she's scandalous." He said, "It's not scandal, it's evidence." I said, "You keep using that word." He said, "Because it fits." I said, "You're acting like I've committed a crime." He said, "You recorded one, just not the kind with handcuffs." I told him to stop playing lawyer. He said, "No need, I prefer proper channels." He gathered his folders again, bank, home, utilities, and placed them in a neat stack. He checked his phone. A reminder flashed briefly. Meeting, personal, 3:25 p.m. He tapped it and it disappeared. When he left the room, I sat down at the table, staring at the empty seat across from me. The smell of printer toner hung faintly in the air. I took a deep breath and told myself I'd make it right. After all, he hadn't left yet. That had to mean something. Before bed, I saw a small red circle drawn on the wall calendar, next Thursday. I asked what it was for. He said, "Follow up." I tried to laugh, but it didn't sound right. That night, when he closed the guest room door, I heard something slide into the desk, metal against wood. Then the faint beep of his phone again. A few seconds later, I saw his muted screen light up with a note. File uploaded successfully. It was becoming a rhythm now. The calm, the silence, the documentation. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe his quiet wasn't weakness at all, but strategy. Friday night, the week after everything began, I got invited to a birthday gathering at a rooftop bar, the same one where Mark had messaged me before. I told Ethan I was going out with co-workers. He just nodded. No questions, no argument. That should have felt like freedom, but instead it made me uneasy. He stayed home, sitting at his desk as usual, the faint glow of his laptop screen visible through the half-open guest room door. As I grabbed my bag, I heard the printer start again. The sound followed me into the hall, soft but deliberate. At the bar, everything sparkled. Glasses clinking, laughter, lights bouncing off metal tables. People were dancing, taking photos, tagging locations. Mark was there. Of course he was. He smiled when he saw me and said he'd been wondering if I'd show up. I told myself I wasn't there for him, that I just needed to feel normal again. Someone poured shots. I took one, then another. Mark teased me about my serious married face, and I told him my husband didn't like parties. He said, "Then he doesn't like you," and I laughed because everyone else did. Someone started filming a toast for social media. I didn't even realize I'd been pulled into the circle until the camera was pointed my way. Someone shouted, "Tell us how a woman celebrates freedom." And I said, half joking, half mean, by remembering what excitement feels like. Everyone cheered. When Mark leaned in and pretended to whisper something, someone caught the moment on camera. It looked like a kiss, though it wasn't, I think. At least, that's what I told myself later. The group kept chanting for another toast. The night stretched, full of music and smoke. For a few hours, I forgot that anything was wrong. I even posted a quick story. Some anniversaries are better late than never. At midnight, I left, dizzy but trying to look composed. In the parking garage, my heels echoed sharply against the concrete. The air smelled like oil and rain. When I reached my car, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, steady, measured, not close but not far. I turned. No one. Still, my skin prickled. When I got home, the apartment was dark, except for the dim light under the guest room door. I opened the front door quietly and froze when I heard a faint click, like a drawer locking. I set my bag down and peeked in. Ethan was there, headphones on, speaking in a low voice. I caught a few words. Follow-up, records, archive. He turned, met my eyes, and ended the call. I said, "You're up late." He said, "You too." I laughed nervously, said I'd been out celebrating. He said, "I noticed." I asked how. He said, "It's all online." I said people love to exaggerate. He said, "Not the camera." I walked over and glanced at his screen. A spreadsheet again, columns of names, dates, and links. He minimized it instantly. I said, "You're keeping score now?" He said, "I'm keeping proof." I rolled my eyes. "Proof of what?" He said, "Of truth." That silence after scared me more than yelling would have. He turned off the printer, stood, and said he was going to bed. I followed him down the hallway, talking too fast. I told him it was all jokes, that people online were twisting things. He said, "They didn't twist your words, Zuleika. You did." I told him he was overreacting. He said, "Maybe, but I'm not the one performing." I slammed the bedroom door and scrolled through my phone, furious. The rooftop video was already up. My coworkers had tagged me in it, adding laughing emojis. The clip showed me raising a glass. Mark beside me, the line about remembering excitement. My stomach dropped. When I turned off the phone, I heard the faint hum of the printer again, steady and patient. The next morning, he was gone before sunrise. The apartment looked organized, too organized. The folders that had been spread across the table were stacked neatly by the printer. A thin binder labeled Utilities now looked thicker than before. A new sticky note was attached to the wall calendar, downtown 11:10 a.m. I crumpled it and threw it away. At work, everyone was talking about the video. One woman said it was bold. Another called it a bit much. I tried to act unbothered. During lunch, Nora said she hoped Ethan had a sense of humor. I said, "He'll live." But the moment I said it, something inside me twisted. That night, I found Ethan in the kitchen, staring at the empty space where our anniversary gift had been, a framed photo of us from the first year of marriage. The frame was gone. I said, "Did you move it?" He said, "I removed what no longer fits." I told him he was being childish. He said, "You mean decisive." Then he carried his coffee cup to the sink, rinsed it, and left it on the opposite counter from mine again. He spent the rest of the evening in the guest room, door closed. I scrolled through the rooftop comments again, heart racing. Someone had tagged a still photo from the video. Mark's arm around my waist, me laughing. It already had hundreds of likes. I wanted to believe it was harmless, but the image looked like a confession. When Ethan came out later, I tried to make small talk. I said I was thinking about going away for the weekend to clear my head. He said, "You might want to clear your conscience instead." I told him not to talk to me like that. He said, "How should I talk to someone who keeps lying to herself?" I shouted that he had no proof. He said, "That's the thing, you gave me plenty." He picked up his keys, and as he walked past, I saw his phone light up. A message preview said, "File uploaded successfully." I followed him to the door, still yelling, asking where he was going. He said, "To make sure everything's backed up." He closed the door gently. I sank onto the couch, trembling. I opened the group chat with my friends. Someone had shared the rooftop video again, this time captioned, "Some people's vows don't mean much." I wanted to defend myself, but anything I said sounded hollow. An hour later, I texted Ethan, "We need to talk." He didn't respond. Around midnight, I heard the printer start again. The soft whirring filled the silence. I got up and walked to the guest room. The door was slightly ajar. I saw him leaning over the desk, placing something into a folder. I said, "You're really making this a project, aren't you?" He said, "It's called preparation." I said, "For what?" He said, "For honesty." I laughed bitterly, said, "You sound like you're planning a case." He said, "I'm planning an ending." Then he turned off the light. That line followed me into my dreams. The next day, the video reached a gossip page. My notifications exploded. Hundreds of comments, strangers dissecting my marriage. I walked into the break room at work and everyone went quiet. One woman whispered, "That's her." Mr. Caro called me into his office again. He said the situation was complicating client relations. He suggested I take some personal days. I said I didn't need pity. He said, "It's not pity, it's space." On my way out, I passed the office printer. It was spooling again, printing a stack of anonymous papers. The last sheet came out blank, curling slowly onto the tray. I went home early, exhausted. Ethan was there, calm as ever. He asked, "Rough day?" I said, "You have no idea." He said, "I probably do." I snapped, "Why do you have to be so smug?" He said, "Because the truth doesn't need to shout." I told him he'd regret treating me like a criminal. He said, "No, I'll just handle it properly." The way he said it made the hairs on my arm stand up. He poured himself tea, carried it to the table, and sat. I watched as he opened his folder, labeled Home, flipped through papers, and quietly slid one into another envelope. Then he picked up his phone. A reminder appeared on his screen. Meeting, personal, 10:45 a.m. He tapped it once and dismissed it. The room filled with that mechanical calm again, the hum of the printer, the click of the drawer, the rhythm of someone who'd made up his mind. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the one in control. I felt like a name already typed on one of his forms. Sunday lunch at my parents' house was supposed to be a reset. I wore a soft blue dress, the one my mother said made me look sweet again. Ethan agreed to come, though his tone had that careful neutrality I'd started to hate. I kept telling myself that if he saw us in a normal setting, he'd calm down. Families create balance, right? When we arrived, my mother greeted us with too much excitement, like she was performing. She said, "Finally, my glamorous daughter and her serious husband." My father muttered something about the roast. Leah and Mara were already there. Mara ran up and hugged Ethan first. That detail stung more than it should have. At the table, the air felt heavy. I tried to keep conversation flowing. I told a funny story about a client who'd sent me an email addressed to Mr. Zuleika. People laughed politely. Ethan smiled but said nothing. He ate slowly, cutting his food into perfect squares. Ria said she'd seen that little video online and thought it was empowering. She said, Men today are too fragile to handle confident women. Ethan's fork paused mid-air. He said, maybe confident people don't need to humiliate others to feel seen. I shot him a glare. My mother rolled her eyes and said he was taking things too seriously. Ethan said, seriousness is underrated. Jonas, my father, tried to change the subject, asking about work. I said business was fine. Leah asked if the company had said anything about the video. I said, it's my private life. She said, it's not private when it's trending. Mara looked up from her plate and asked in her small voice, Auntie, why did the people at school say you like someone else now? The table went silent. I forced a laugh and said, they're just being silly, sweetheart. She said, but they showed a video. I glanced at Ethan, waiting for him to say something, to defend me, to redirect. But he didn't. He just looked at me with that same unreadable calm. Leah stood up and took Mara to wash her hands, giving Ethan a quiet, sharp look on her way out. When they were gone, my mother said softly, kids repeat nonsense. Don't make it a big deal. Ethan said, it's only nonsense if it isn't true. I said, you're poisoning everyone against me. He said, no, I'm just not lying for you anymore. I pushed my chair back, hard enough that it scraped the floor. My father asked us to keep voices down. I said, everyone here loves to act like I'm the villain. Ethan said, stop acting then. The words hit like a slap. I stormed out onto the patio. The air was cold, sharp against my skin. Through the window, I saw him helping Mara with her napkin, calm and patient. That image made me angrier than any insult could. After lunch, Leah cornered me in the hallway. She said, he's not going to shout or break things. That's not his way, but don't mistake his quiet for weakness. I said, he's lucky to have me. He'll get over it. She said, he's not trying to get over it. He's preparing to leave it. I told her to stay out of it. She said, then stop dragging the rest of us into it. We drove home in silence. At the red light near the school, Ethan's phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a reminder. Downtown 11:55 a.m., Monday. He dismissed it without looking at me. I asked if it was work-related. He said, in a way. I said, you've been acting strange lately. He said, I've been acting consistent. You just started noticing. When we got home, I went straight to the bathroom and cried quietly, angry that I was crying at all. I came out to find him sitting at the table sorting through folders again. This time, I noticed something new. 3 neat dividers labeled Home, Auto, Bank, and another thick binder marked Utilities. I opened it when he left the room. Inside were copies of receipts, statements, even screenshots of posts and messages. He was building a story. I flipped through the pages, shaking. At the back was a sticky note that said, Meeting personal. I threw the binder back down and shouted from the hall, You're ridiculous. You think you're in a movie. He walked in, calm as always, and said, Just making sure the facts are straight. I said, What facts? He said, The kind that hold up. That tone, it wasn't cruel, it was final. Later, while he was on the phone, I stood outside the guest room door and listened. He said, Yes, everything's organized. Yes, all backed up. His voice was steady, careful. Then a soft beep sounded, and he said, File uploaded successfully. When he hung up, I walked in. I said, Who are you talking to? He said, Follow up. I said, Follow up for what? He said, For closure. I told him he was being cryptic again. He said, You'll understand soon. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Mara's question in my head. I told myself she was too young to remember, that kids forget. But something in Ethan's stillness told me he wouldn't let it fade. On Monday morning, I saw him getting ready before sunrise. He dressed neatly, wore his dark blue shirt, the one he saves for serious days. He checked his watch, then slipped a small USB drive into his pocket. I asked where he was going. He said, Downtown. I asked why. He said, "Routine." After he left, I wandered around the apartment, half dizzy. The fridge was cleaner than usual. No sticky notes except one, "Bring forms." By afternoon, I convinced myself he was bluffing, trying to scare me. Men like him didn't really leave. They just threatened to. That evening, I went to the supermarket for groceries, hoping to feel normal again. At the checkout line, I felt eyes on me. A woman from the neighborhood stared at her phone, then at me, then whispered something to her friend. My screen buzzed. Someone had shared the rooftop video again, edited with music and captions. She left him waiting on their anniversary. I could feel heat crawling up my neck. The cashier scanned slowly, almost awkwardly polite. When I got home, Ethan was sitting at the table again. He looked up and said, "Rough day?" I said, "People love drama." He said, "They just mirror what's already there." I said, "You could defend me, you know." He said, "Why defend what's documented?" I shouted that he was being heartless. He said, "Heartless is spreading your own betrayal and calling it empowerment." I went cold. "So, you're judging me now?" He said, "No, I'm acknowledging reality." He stacked his folders again, lined them perfectly, and said softly, "You wanted an audience, Zuleika. You've got one now." Then he stood, grabbed his keys, and left. The apartment felt hollow when the door clicked shut. I stared at his empty chair, his half-drunk tea cooling beside a pen with blue ink smudged at the tip. I wanted to cry again, but mostly I wanted to believe he was bluffing. I opened his laptop, half out of curiosity, half out of fear. On the desktop were two folders, Archive A and Archive B, both locked. In the Downloads folder was one file name, Statement. I clicked it, but it was password protected. The faint smell of printer toner still lingered in the air. When he came home later, I tried to smile, to act calm. I asked if we could talk. He said, "Tomorrow." I asked, "Why not now?" He said, "Because tomorrow is for formal things." Then he went to bed, and for the first time since the night on the rooftop, I was scared that maybe there was no version of this I could talk my way out of anymore. The next few days felt like waiting for an exam I hadn't studied for. Ethan was polite, distant, and perfectly on time for everything. He got up before me, made coffee, packed his bag, and left with the same calm expression. I tried to start small talk when he came home. Asked about work, about the weather, about dinner. He answered every question with one sentence. Never cruel, never warm. The apartment had changed too. There were new labels on the folders by the desk. Home, auto, bank, utilities. The one marked utilities was thicker now, stuffed tight with pages I didn't recognize. Every night, I heard the soft hum of the printer and the click of the locked drawer afterward. One evening, I caught him standing on the balcony, holding his phone at just the right angle, taking photos of what looked like bills. I stepped outside and asked what he was doing. He said, "Backing things up." I said, "You mean being dramatic?" He said, "I mean being responsible." I laughed and told him he sounded like a lawyer. He said, "No, just a man learning from experience." That answer didn't sit right. Later that night, I opened his desk drawer when he went to shower, but it was locked tight. The key wasn't in sight. I searched the kitchen, under papers, even behind the microwave. Nothing. The only new thing I noticed was a USB stick taped beneath a folder, labeled taxes. I peeled it off, but didn't plug it in. Fear and curiosity wrestled in my chest. I put it back before he returned. The next morning, he was up early again, typing quietly in the living room. His phone chimed with an alert. Paper drop, 9:05 a.m. He tapped dismiss and slid the phone into his pocket. I asked what that was. He said, "A reminder." I said, "For what?" He said, "To bring forms." He left a few minutes later. I sat there staring at the closed door. I texted my mother that Ethan was turning cold and secretive. She replied almost instantly, "He's trying to control you. Post something confident again." So I did. I took a selfie in the office kitchen later that day, captioned, "Don't mistake silence for weakness." It was meant for him, of course. Within an hour, the post got attention. Co-workers whispered near the water cooler. Nora raised an eyebrow and said, "You really like living publicly, huh?" I said, "Transparency keeps people honest." She muttered, "Or exposed." When I got home that night, Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table. A small stack of documents rested beside his tea. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Sorting." I picked up one of the folders and read the label, Archive B. I asked what that meant. He said, "A backup." I said, "Backup of what?" He said, "Everything you keep pretending didn't happen." I rolled my eyes and said he was obsessed with control. He said, "No, I just prefer the truth to performance." That phrase, truth to performance, echoed in my head long after he left the room. That weekend, our friends invited us to a small get-together at the community center. I thought it could help, a chance to act normal again. I dressed up, told myself we could still play the happy couple. He came, but he stayed on the far side of the room, polite but detached. When someone asked how our anniversary went, I tried to joke it off. I said, "Oh, we redefined romance this year, modern style." A few people laughed, but the laughter died quickly. Ethan didn't smile. One of his friends said, "I saw the video." I pretended not to hear. Someone else raised a glass and said, "To honesty and excitement." The group cheered. I lifted my glass too, trying to look confident, but my hand trembled slightly. Someone was filming again, and I hated how aware I was of it. As the music played, I glanced across the room and saw Ethan checking his phone. For a second, his screen lit up. I caught the glimpse of another reminder. Meeting, personal, 11:20 a.m. When the event ended, I walked to the parking lot with friends, still forcing laughs. Ethan was already waiting by the car, calm as ever. I asked if he'd had fun. He said, "It was informative." I asked, "Informative how?" He said, "People reveal themselves when they think the camera's off." I said, "You're being cryptic again." He said, "And you're still pretending this is repairable." He opened the car door for me, polite but distant. On the drive home, I talked non-stop, trying to fill the silence. He just nodded occasionally, eyes fixed on the road. When we reached the apartment, I followed him inside, determined to get some reaction. I said, "Are you even planning to talk to me like a husband again?" He said, "No, like a witness." I froze. "A witness to what?" He said, "To what happens when people think actions don't have records." I said, "You're threatening me." He said, "I'm protecting myself." That quiet confidence terrified me more than shouting ever could. He turned to leave the room, but I grabbed his arm. "You can't just walk away from this," I said. He looked down at my hand and said, "You walked away first. I'm just documenting the steps." Then he freed himself and walked to the guest room. I stayed up late that night, pacing the living room. The glow from under the guest room door stayed steady. Around midnight, I heard the printer again. Then a low mechanical hum, followed by a soft beep, the now familiar signal that something had been saved. The next morning, Ethan made breakfast. He even poured me coffee, which startled me. I said, "So we're playing nice now?" He said, "I just wanted to leave things civil." "Leave?" I repeated. He didn't look up. "Eventually." I asked when. He said, "When it's proper." That word again. He picked up his keys from the counter. I noticed a new key on his ring, silver, smaller than the rest. I asked what it opened. He said, "Security." I didn't know if he meant the apartment or something else entirely. That evening, he sat outside on the balcony with his laptop. I stepped out behind him and asked what he was doing. He said, "Closing loops." I said, "You're scaring me." He said, "You should have been scared earlier." I said, "You're not the same person I married." He said, "No, I became the person you forced me to be, methodical." I tried to turn it into an argument, to pull some emotion from him, but he didn't bite. He said, "I'll handle this properly." I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "It means I'm done trying to teach someone who doesn't want to learn." He went inside, closed his laptop, and locked it in the drawer. I stood there for a long time, feeling the cool night air and the faint smell of printer ink drifting from the open window. My phone buzzed. Mark again. "You okay? You've gone quiet." I didn't reply. I deleted the thread. Through the glass, I could see Ethan sitting at his desk, perfectly still. The faint blue light of his screen flickered across his face. He wasn't angry anymore. He was resolved. The next morning, he dressed carefully, pressed shirt, dark jacket. As he adjusted his tie, I asked if he had another meeting. He said, "Yes." I said, "Work?" He said, "Something like that." Then he added, almost gently, "You'll find out soon enough." I tried to laugh, to turn it into a joke, but my throat went dry. He picked up the thick binder labeled Utilities and the folder marked Archive B. Before he left, he turned to me and said quietly, "You wanted control. I'm just giving it structure." Then he walked out, leaving the door open behind him. And for once, I didn't slam it. I just stood there, surrounded by the hum of appliances and the faint, sterile scent of toner, realizing that properly might mean something I could never undo. I saw him again 3 days later, in the lobby of my office tower. I was heading out for lunch when a man in a grey suit stepped forward, holding an envelope. He said my full name, calm and professional, and confirmed it was me. Then he placed the papers in my hands and said, "You've been served." The world tilted. My co-workers nearby slowed, pretending not to stare. I opened the envelope and read the words, "Petition for divorce, temporary financial and possession orders, pending hearing." Ethan stood a few steps away, composed as ever. He nodded politely to the server, then to me. I said, "You're really doing this?" He said, "You told the world your version. Now it's time for mine." I whispered that he was humiliating me. He said, "No, Zuleika, you did that yourself." The elevator bell chimed behind him. People stepped aside as he walked through the glass doors and out into the daylight, not once looking back. I stood frozen in the center of the lobby, the envelope trembling in my hand, hearing only that echo of his calm voice. "I'll handle it properly. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.